Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by the boxing channel known as AKHi TV. And of course, AKHi TV in this video, he's going to be talking about once again Mr. Canelo Alvarez. And like I said earlier, not to make too many videos about Mr. Canelo Alvarez, but I do find a certain amount of topics about him interesting because, like I said, depending on whatever channel that you may go to, there's always going to be a certain amount of narratives about him. But I thought that I would talk about him in this video because not only would I thought that I would address a certain amount of the narratives that Mr. AKHi TV is going to be talking about in this video about Canelo Alvarez and the regular narratives and storylines that he tries to put out there and spoon feed people about certain fighters and Mr. Canelo Alvarez. But I'm also going to be talking about the fight that more than likely is still happening. Of course, there has been recent news by certain channels or media outlets that maybe the Canelo Alvarez versus Dmitry Bivol fight is in danger because, of course, Bivol, he still does reside, I believe, in that is St. Petersburg, Russia, if I'm getting that of the city or the town correctly. But when it comes down to it, all in all, I believe that more than likely the fight will happen. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, when it comes down to it, Mr. AKHi TV, he's going to be talking about overall the things that he's going to say in this video. He's going to be talking about what he believes of the Canelo Alvarez versus Dmitry Bivol fight. I've already said a multitude of times what I think of the Dmitry Bivol versus Canelo Alvarez fight. I think that it's a terrific fight. I think that Canelo versus Dmitry Bivol, like I said in my last video when I made a comparison, I think that this fight is almost as if we were to compare it, say, to that of the standards of a Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr., if overall it would have been a comparison like that, it almost would have been them moving up to, say, probably a weight division of 154, maybe even 160, and probably facing someone like an Araceli Lara when he was at his best, pretty much almost like after that victory of an Austin Shot or an Alfredo Ngulu. You know, it would have been something like that, to where Araceli Lara, when it comes down to it, he would have not been as popular maybe as that of a Keith Thurman. He would have maybe not been as popular as that of a Sean Porter or some of these other guys. But for those of you, of course, that knew what a prime Araceli Lara was, Araceli Lara, who, of course, actually was one of my favorite fighters to watch for years upon years upon years. Unfortunately, now I think that his best years are pretty much behind him. But for those of us, of course, that knew who Araceli Lara was a very, very slippery, very tricky Cuban-style type of fighter. Overall, that had a very great amateur pedigree. And when it comes to Dmitry Bivol, of course, there's not, the European fighters or the Russian fighters are not exactly like the Cubans, but they can be very, very tough. And Dmitry Bivol, he does have a very good amateur pedigree and Olympic background from what I know. He's a person that is very decently tough. He's decently strong. He's fast. He's a great athlete. He has decent feet. He has very quick feet overall for his size. And there's a lot of people that believe that Dmitry Bivol, especially within those higher weight classes, and not even just within the higher weight classes, but within a certain amount of weight classes, that he would be the biggest threat towards Canelo. But of course, now that Canelo has fought him or decided to face him next, you notice a certain amount of the energy is changing. But we're going to talk about that as well. I'm also going to be talking about more than likely who I believe is going to win this fight next as well. So it should be very interesting. But anyways, let's get into the video. Let's see what our friend AKHi TV has to say.
So Canelo Alvarez is fighting Bivol on May 7th. Now I was curious to know what exactly Andre Ward thinks about this fight, because this is one of them fights where cherry picking could definitely go wrong. For example, Teofimo Lopez versus...
So basically what has AKHi TV already told you at the beginning of this video. Basically he just said this is one of those instances where cherry picking could definitely go wrong. So what AKHi TV is really going to try to claim this as is that this is a cherry pick. And I don't really know how you're going to claim this as a cherry pick because, once again, for those of us that actually know shit about boxing, Dmitry Bivol, in my opinion, he is a person that not only is more dangerous than that of a David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo, he is pretty much infinitely more dangerous overall than that of a Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez. If David Benavidez overall and Jamal Charlo, if they're a diamondback rattlesnake in terms of their venom potency, if we're just going to compare it like that, what Dmitry Bivol would be a taipan or a black mamba. That's pretty much overall how I would compare it. Meaning what? That basically overall, yes, all those fighters would be considered somewhat dangerous. But when we take a look at Dmitry Bivol, he is someone to where when you take a look overall at the danger, I think all in all that his level of danger is much more higher just because of what he can bring to the table. And I've already explained this a certain amount of times, not to sound like a broken record here, but like I said, in my opinion, he's a greater athlete than those guys. He's smarter than those guys in terms of boxing ability. I think that he has more boxing ability. I think that he's faster than both of those guys. I think that overall he's better. I think that he has better footwork. I think that he has faster feet when it comes down to it. I think that you can debate that he certainly has more punching power, even though certain people may disagree. But let's also keep in mind that Dmitry Bivol has pretty much fought at 175 for the majority of his career when it comes down to it. And he is, somewhat light overall for that division. He somewhat has a decent build for it, but he's not as thick or as big as someone like, say, an Artur Beterbiev. So it is what it is.
Kambosos. Even though that was the ultimate cherry pick by Teofimo Lopez in order to duck Devin Haney. I told you all.
Well, I agree that Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos also does not sound super duper interested in facing that of a Devin Haney. But when it comes down to it, I don't know how you can really compare Canelo Alvarez versus Dmitry Bivol to that of George Kambosos versus Teofimo Lopez. When Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos was going into that fight, when they were heading into that fight, George Kambosos, I gave him about a 30% chance because Teofimo looked like he was maybe going through some mental things, and I did see overall some of his fights, like against Mickey Bay, and I believe all in all against that one British fighter, what was his name, Lee Selby, I believe, for, two former champions. So George Kambosos obviously had some decent boxing pedigree, but I just did not think that he was going to beat Teofimo. I still thought that Teofimo was going to be too talented, and they pretty much had the same style, but I was not shocked when George Kambosos ended up pulling off the victory. A little bit surprised, but not super duper shocked, because I did say that if Teofimo Lopez did not take that fight seriously, that he was going to have his hands full. And, well, unfortunately for Teofimo, he did not take that fight as seriously as probably what he should have. So it is what it is. But Canelo Alvarez versus Dmitry Bivol, for those of us, of course, that are actually serious about it, and obviously, these LDBC and new media channels, they at least at one point in time felt some sort of way about this fight. Because once again, you can even see certain channels. You can see certain channels like Dante's Boxing Nation at one point in time overall, and I may even do another video about it, where he says that Dmitry Bivol is one of the only two opponents that I believe would beat Canelo Alvarez hands down. But now that this fight is happening, what are they saying? Oh, well, he's facing nothing but Europeans. Oh, he's doing this, doing that. Yes, you can overall make the European argument if you want to, but at the end of the day, like I said, some of these European fighters, you can debate all in all that they're the best option out there for Canelo Alvarez. Now, if it was someone overall maybe like a John Ryder, then that's something overall a little bit understandable. And, I know the difference between a hype job and someone all in all that, can actually box. Now, when I take a look over recently at someone like a Michael Conlan, for example, who recently lost his last fight, I believe against a British fighter named, named Leigh Wood. That was someone, in my opinion, that, I don't see him as a big, viable threat towards a lot of people out there. And that's why he ended up losing the fight, where he ended up, truly having to face up against adversity in his first, major bout. But it is what it is. And I'm talking about first major bout overall to where he actually faced a decently ranked opponent. But of course, that's a conversation for another time. But when it comes down to it, all in all, like I said, Dmitry Bivol, he is a fantastic fighter.
Leading up to the fight, that Kambosos was alive.
And you have to overall, state the context between this, because Canelo versus Dmitry Bivol, that pretty much is going to be looked at as a 50-50 fight for those of us that truly know about boxing. And that's not me, trying to bullshit you here when it comes out of that's not me trying to do what some of these other channels do or do what some of these other people do when they see their favorite fighter get in a bullshit fight, like when Gervonta Tank Davis gets in the fight with Rolly Romero, and people say, "Oh, this is actually a good fight." Like, no, that's not what I'm trying to do here. All right, because we all know these. No offense against Gervonta Tank Davis or Rolly Romero, but Rolly Romero is not going to have that big of a chance in that fight. Dmitry Bivol versus Canelo Alvarez is the complete opposite, and George Kambosos versus Teofimo, that was looked at as somewhat of an interesting fight heading into it. But Dmitry Bivol, in my view, you can even argue that he has as much as a 50% chance to possibly win this fight against Canelo Alvarez. Maybe I would say that because Canelo Alvarez, because he is so advanced at this point in time in his career, and he pretty much is so experienced and, pretty much at the best point in his career, not his peak athletically, physically, mentally, everywhere when it comes down to it in his boxing career. I probably would favor him a good 55, maybe even as much as 60%. But at the end of the day, you could certainly argue that Dmitry Bivol has at least a 50% chance. Some would even favor him to win this fight.
underdog, and this will be a cherry that will bite back. It's gonna be a tough fight, which turned out to be exactly that, and I feel the same exact way about Canelo versus Bivol. So does Andre Ward. Some time ago, Andre Ward told Canelo Alvarez to stay away from Bivol, which could only means he sees Bivol as a deadly fight for Canelo. Check it out.
Canelo better leave Beterbiev and Bivol alone too. Stay away from both them guys.
Well, apparently Andre Ward haven't got the memo. Canelo Alvarez is the European assassin. He's not staying away from any European, as he's on the road to become Europe undisputed pound for pound #1 king. So he feels nobody.
Right, so like I said, a lot of these channels, they're basically just going to do the same shit that they usually do, which is basically say that, oh, Canelo, he's facing these, European fighters because they all have a similar style and blah, blah, blah. Dmitry Bivol, even though, I understand he's a European fighter, he's not a person that has a 100% similar style to that of Billy Joe Saunders overall, or that, say, of a, what the hell was the last guy that he fought? Caleb Plant. Those guys are more defensive first fighters. Don't get me wrong, Dmitry Bivol is somewhat of a, defensive fighter. But Dmitry Bivol, I believe, is a little bit more offensive than those guys. Meaning what? That means that a Dmitry Bivol sometimes, if he has to exchange, he may be willing to, or at least he may be willing to push Canelo Alvarez back. And then, I'm not going to say that he may be willing to do it as much as Artur Beterbiev. And do I think, all in all, that there's going to be a points that maybe Dmitry Bivol may feel Canelo Alvarez's power and say, wow, I may have to back up against this guy and maybe rethink things. Yeah, there might be a couple of situations with that, but that's what's going to make this fight so interesting. Because really, when you have a big bout like this, you really get to see, all in all, what true overall character of the fighters really are. It's almost like watching a great movie. After a while, you really want to see the character for who they truly are. When they really get tested with adversity, once they go up against the villain there, overall, once they get, challenged with a troubling situation, you get to really see overall what that character is truly about and what, choices they're going to make, whether it be good or bad. It's the same thing overall, with a big bout. The big question is about Canelo Alvarez is he going to be able to handle Dmitry Bivol's speed, power, and size when it comes down to it, and his skills? Will he be able to implement the same game plan, and will he overall be able to do what he's usually able to do against Bivol overall, like he was able to do against a couple of the other fighters that he's been able to do over the past few years? And the big question about Dmitry Bivol is, all in all, how will he handle the body shots of Canelo Alvarez? How will he adjust when it comes down to it? Will that jab, will that right cross, will his movement get to him early? We'll see, all in all, what happens. It's going to be very interesting to see how these two fighters deal with each other.
You tell him nothing when it comes to Europe. Nevertheless, I know Andre Ward picked Caleb Plant to beat Canelo Alvarez his last fight, which obviously resulted in him receiving a lot of hate by Canelo fans. However, you guys have to take that with a grain of salt, because like Andre Ward said, he sees Caleb Plant like his brother. So obviously he was going to be rooting for Caleb Plant, even if he truly felt Caleb Plant would lose. I mean, that's no difference than Canelo rooting for Ryan. You think if Ryan is fighting Gervonta Tank Davis, Canelo is going to come out and pick Tank to knock out Ryan? Of course not. Even if he believes Ryan is going to get slept, he will still pick Ryan just like he...
Yes, just like how I believe that you did not truly 100% believe that Deontay Wilder was going to win that third Tyson Fury fight, but all in all, Deontay had the complexion for your protection, so you went with him anyway. Now listen, once again, I have no problem with, cheering for your owner. AKHi TV, he's not he's not even of that demographic, so he's not even overall cheering for his own when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, you can cheer for whoever the hell you want to cheer for. I have no problem with that. But if you're making your predictions overall around the, well, I'm cheering for this guy just because I like this guy, unless you're in that person's camp or in that person's corner, then basically what that tells me is that you're not a logical or objective predictor. You're not a person all in all that is supposed to be relied upon. That, and your credibility is pretty much thrown out the window.
Picked Mario Barrios and Leo Santa Cruz when they got slept by Tank. More importantly, when it comes to Canelo fighting Bivol, Andre Ward sees it the exact same way I see it. This is a very dangerous fight for Canelo, due to the fact that Canelo is a very flawed fighter. Even against the weakest opposition Canelo Alvarez has been selecting over the years, Canelo has been getting exposed nearly every fight. against Caleb Plant, Billy
Right.
Joe Saunders.
Right, these guys always say that, but how has he necessarily gotten exposed? I mean, like I said, now once again, I've already done many videos on this, not to sound like a broken record here or beat a dead horse or anything, but it's just always so obnoxious to hear these narratives. Because like I said, these people, they try to act like Canelo Alvarez is some sort of like Deontay Wilder. Like, Deontay Wilder was a legitimate fighter to where he would go into fights and he would actually get outboxed, even sometimes by like C-grade opponents. Like, he would go in the ring and sometimes he would even have problems with people like, who the hell was that one tall black dude that he fought that one time that was undefeated? God, I can't remember his name. Oh, Gerald Washington. He fought Gerald Washington, lost like, the first 4 rounds of that fight before he knocked him out. Fought Artur Spiltzka, lost some rounds on that fight before he knocked him out. Got hurt a little bit by Eric Molina, who pretty much was a pushover. Like, Canelo Alvarez never looks like that. I don't know why these guys overall always try to compare him to someone like a Deontay Wilder or something like that. That's not me saying that Canelo Alvarez may not have certain flaws, but, here and there. But, come on. In my opinion, you have to be a damn fool to realize, to not realize all in all that Canelo Alvarez is an extraordinarily skilled fighter. And I can tell all in all overall with Canelo Alvarez of today versus what I seen several years ago, he is an improved fighter.
A washed-up Kovalev, Amir Khan moving up 2 weight classes. All of these fighters was easily outboxed.
Yes, Amir Khan overall moved up 2 weight classes, and Sergey Kovalev was allegedly washed up. Don't get me wrong, Sergey Kovalev was not the same Kovalev when he fought, SOG Ward. But Sergey Kovalev was a legitimate champion. All right? A fighter that is washed up is not even going to have a belt. Unless overall, it is in a division that they're just completely done in. It is what it is. All right? But, yeah, once again, these are the same guys that, they always say, take a look at how Terrence Crawford beat Kell Brook and Amir Khan. Now, those 2 fighters were washed up. You know how I know those 2 fighters were washed up at the time when he fought them? Because just ask yourself this question. Do they have a chance to win a belt at the 154-pound division? Do they have a chance to win the belt at the 147-pound division? Even if they went to the 140-pound division, would they even have a 100% shot to beat Josh Taylor or Jose Ramirez? I'm not so sure about that. That's how you know when a fighter is washed up, when there's absolutely no chance that they're ever going to win a belt again. Or if they do win a belt, they're pretty much gifted one. Like when Miguel Cotto won that belt against that one Japanese fighter, I believe, in the latter part of his career, like within the final couple fights. I don't remember, which fighter it was.
In Canelo early until Canelo caught up with them, then got them out of there in the later rounds. To make matters worse, whenever Canelo Alvarez stepped up in competition, he arguably lost. When he fought Gennady Golovkin, majority of the fans felt that Gennady Golovkin got robbed. When Canelo fought Lara, that was definitely a robbery, where Lara clearly won 8 rounds. And obviously...
Well, what I'll say is this. I think that you can debate that Sonny Lara won the fight. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But you also maybe could debate that Lara, at certain times, maybe did not throw enough punches. But of course, if you debated that Lara won the fight, I would not have a huge problem with that as well. The first time around, I thought that Gennady Golovkin did beat Canelo Alvarez. But the second time, I had Canelo Alvarez just winning the fight. So at the end of the day, the majority of the time, has Canelo maybe gotten a little bit of help on the scorecards here and there? Yeah, maybe you can certainly debate that. In the Lara fight, maybe, one could debate that. In the first Gennady Golovkin fight, you certainly could debate that. Even in the Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight, when there was that one draw scorecard, that was ridiculous. But at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez has still proved overall that he is an A-grade boxer. And like I said, this is coming from a person that, now I'm much more logical and objective than what I used to be. But I used to hate Canelo Alvarez's guts. I used to think all in all that he was a super one-dimensional fighter. But years and years overall later on down the road, I realized that there was a lot more to him overall than what I once originally thought. And at the current moment in time, I do believe that he is the current number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. And I don't think that there's any other fighter overall on earth, in my view, besides maybe a couple of others that, to be honest with you, quite have the boxing ability of a Canelo Alvarez, at least in the current world of boxing right now.
When Canelo fought Floyd Mayweather, he lost every single minute of every single round, despite the fact that Floyd was fighting at his 5th weight class as a grandpa at 36 years old. Even then.
I don't know why these guys always say that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was a grandpa. He was 36 years old, Floyd Mayweather Jr. was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. You know, it's so funny once again because I always get these certain guys here and there that come in my comment section. They're like, "Yeah, but when you get older, you know that your athleticism decreases, right?" Yes, of course I know that. Like I get these guys overall that come in here and they just don't think I get grasp the concept of age, and they just must think that I think people are immortal. Like I get it. I get overall the basic concept. When people age overall. Yes, when it comes down to, sometimes their abilities, they start to go down, but we also must understand, the thing of context. We also must grasp, the concept of context, which basically is this: not every fighter is the same. Not every individual is the same. Now, there are certain fighters when it comes down to it that maybe at age 34, maybe at age 35, they're pretty much completely done with their career. Miguel Cotto at age 35, he was pretty much French toast. He was done. When you talk about Manny Pacquiao, though, for example, he was done at his point in time in his career when he was 43 years old. He was a world champion overall. He beat the undefeated Keith Thurman when he was 41 years old. Bernard Hopkins was one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters in all the sport of boxing when he was 43 years old. All right, when it came down to it. All right, Floyd Mayweather Jr. was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter when he was 36 years old. Okay? He was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter pretty much almost the whole entire time he was in the sport. So it is what it is, at least when he started getting into the higher ranks.
Some way, somehow.
So like I said, let's not just sit here and pretend that Canelo Alvarez, that he just lost to some bum or anything like that. But when it comes down to the reason why they always give Canelo Alvarez so much shit, compared to some of the other opponents overall that they lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr. is because they know that Canelo Alvarez right now, in terms of #1 pound-for-pound, that he's the main threat. That's the reason why they gave him so much shit, because basically what they're secretly saying is that, if Canelo Alvarez is really supposed to be the #1 pound-for-pound, or this dude, if he's really supposed to be that great, why did he lose to a 36-year-old Floyd Mayweather Jr. in that way? Well, the reason why that is because Floyd Mayweather Jr., he's even, in my view, a little bit of a greater fighter than what Canelo Alvarez was. It just is what it is, at least, at that current moment in time. But do I think that Canelo Alvarez has gotten better as a fighter? Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Canelo got a draw in one of the judges' scorecards, which come May 7th. That's Bivol Ultimate Challenge. Not Canelo, but the actual judges. Legends have it that Canelo has the scorecards in his pocket. Yep, the judges' actual scorecards in his pocket before the beginning of every single fight. Therefore, I'm picking Bivol to win. Excuse me, to lose. In one of the biggest robberies of the year. See, Canelo Alvarez looks at all of the European fighters the same. He thinks that he has the kryptonite for their style. Canelo believes the Mexican style is the kryptonite for the European style. The reason why is because usually the...
Right, but when we really talk about Canelo Alvarez, and this is why these guys are so stupid, because I just think that they take a look at things way too one-dimensional. But of course, like I said, do I think that AKHi TV truly believes 100% what he's saying? No, I don't. But, whether he believes or not believes, it's a stupid point to make, because a lot of these people, unfortunately, they do believe it. So it is what it is. But anyways, when it comes down to it, when we talk about the Mexican style, I'm not going to say that there's a 100%, just a way to fight, necessarily like Mexican fighters. But when you talk about Mexican fighters, when it comes down to it, Canelo, he kind of has separated himself from the mold of other Mexican fighters. When we talk about Canelo Alvarez, not saying that other Mexican fighters are not slick per se, when it comes down to it and not defensively responsible. But just to be quite honest with you, at least looking at Mexican fighters during my time, I don't think I've ever seen a Mexican fighter that has been as slick overall and as defensively responsible as what I saw Canelo Alvarez is. I don't think that Marquez was as skilled as him. I don't think that Oscar De La Hoya was as skilled as him. I don't think that Fernando Vargas was as skilled as him. Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera, anyone else you want to mention. Chavez Sr. was not really around during my time, but I've watched, a certain amount of clips of him. I don't even think that Chavez Sr. was quite as slick and defensively responsible as what Azul Canelo Alvarez was, or is right now. Now, of course, a lot of people, they'll also say, well, what about Salvador Sanchez? Salvador Sanchez, he was, for the day, he was very, very decent because he was very defensively responsible. He could fight in a multitude of ways, and he was very, very decently slick. So if you want to put him up there, then I understand. But Canelo Alvarez, he might be debatably the most skilled Mexican fighter that I've personally ever seen. It's either him or Salvador Sanchez. Chavez Sr. deserves to be up there as well. But Canelo Alvarez, like I said, he, in my view, in terms of his skill set, has surpassed a lot of those Mexican fighters already.
European fighters can't take it to the body, and they can't fight in the inside, nor they know how to defend against body shots. So in Canelo's mind, he's thinking, man, they can outbox me all day.
Well, that's not always 100% incorrect. I don't think that that's always necessarily a bad point to make. But like I said, at the end of the day, when we take a look at Dmitry Bivol, it's very obvious that Dmitry Bivol, that he's someone that is extremely dangerous. You know, like I said, we can't just all take a look at European fighters the same. Now, once again, are there a lot of weak European fighters out there that maybe are kind of just on the assembly line and they may not be overly talented? Yeah, you know, there are certain European fighters like that, but Dmitry Bivol is an exception. You know, Dmitry Bivol, you know, he is an excellent athlete. He is a person, all in all, that can box overall somewhat in a multitude of ways. He's a person that is very decently powerful. He's a person that has great speed. He's a person that has great movement. He's a person that somewhat will exchange with you if he needs to. You know, go ahead and take a look at some of his fights versus John Pascal overall and Joe Smith Jr. You know, now, of course, some may say, well, those fights were a decently long time ago. Yes, they were, but basically what that is going to show you is the best of Dmitry Bivol, especially when he goes up against high-tier competition.
He won't. Eventually, I'm going to break them down to the body and catch up with them. If you notice, that's what Canelo Alvarez does in all of his fights. By the fourth round, he will turn it up to see if his opponent will fold under pressure and is ready to go. If not, he will get back to chopping the body down and repeat that same process.
That's going to be very interesting to see in this fight as well. Will Dmitry Bivol fold under that pressure? Will he be able to handle the body shots of Canelo Alvarez? Because Dmitry Bivol, if he is going to win this fight, I do think that maybe he wants to employ a certain amount of moving around and defensive strategies with Canelo Alvarez. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad idea, but you are also going to have to be willing to exchange with him here and there. Meaning what that, like I said before, in a certain amount of my videos, sometimes you have to risk it to get the biscuit. So basically what that means is that, you know, even if you're a little bit uncomfortable, it means that you're going to have to stick through it. It just is what it is. You know, if Canelo Alvarez is backing you up too much up against the ropes, that's pretty much where he's going to want you. So Dmitry Bivol, sometimes he's going to have to throw uppercuts and hooks to the body, maybe come up to the head as well with the hook, hit him with a good right cross, you know, move constantly, you know, get that good conditioning in when it comes down to it. He's going to have, you know, somewhat of a multitude of ways of fighting Canelo. Because if he doesn't, more than likely Canelo Alvarez, I'm not going to say that he stops him, but more than likely he is going to win this fight.
Yes, that same fill-out process in the seventh round.
Now, some people, of course, may say, well, you know, you just said that about Dmitry Bivol. Do you think that Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez, do you think that they would be better fights overall for Canelo Alvarez? No, I do not. And the reason why is because, you know, and this is why I don't like the point that AKHi TV makes, because, you know, he basically tries to make the same stupid points. Oh, well, Canelo, he don't want to face the black fighters and the Mexican fighters. Jermall Charlo is not that multidimensional either, and David Benavidez is even worse. David Benavidez is a person that he's not the worst I've seen fighting backing up, but he's mainly a pressure fighter. And I think that more than likely that if Canelo Alvarez finally gets him on his heels, and if he's a person that finally he does put him up against the ropes, I think that David Benavidez is pretty much going to get toyed with the rest of the night. It just is what it is. Now, that's my personal prediction. I could be wrong, but we'll see what happens. When it comes to Jermall Charlo, I think that more than likely he's probably going to fight Canelo Alvarez on the back foot. I don't think that it's going to work out either way for Charlo, because I don't think that Charlo really has the power. I don't think that he has the boxing ability, and I don't think all in all that he, you know, he's a very decent athlete. But I think that in order to really push Canelo Alvarez back, at least consistently, you have to be a very, very decent athlete, or you have to have a phenomenal skill set. And I just think that David Benavidez and Charlo, even though, yeah, they're A-grade fighters to a degree, I just don't think that they're on the same level as some of the other fighters that I've seen out there.
Ninth round, in the 11th round, so on and so forth. See, the same thing Canelo did against Caleb Plant. He tried that same game plan against Floyd Mayweather, Lara, and Triple G. The key difference is that Canelo met resistance when he fought Floyd, Lara, and Triple G. Especially...
Well, Canelo actually didn't really try that against Floyd Mayweather Jr. What Canelo Alvarez actually did against Floyd Mayweather Jr., which probably was a mistake, is that he tried to outbox Floyd Mayweather Jr. And when you're a person that is that much bigger than Floyd Mayweather Jr., you know, and Floyd is a person that is faster than you, more experienced than you, when it comes down to it, and a person all in all that probably has better and quicker feet than you, when it comes down to it, then outboxing him probably is not always the best strategy. And sometimes outboxing the boxer, in my view, is not always the worst thing. But why do that all in all when basically, you're the bigger man, you have your certain own strengths, But anyway.
Floyd.
But Canelo at this point in time in his career, what he's shown is that he can fight in a multitude of ways as well. Maybe he could be sometimes a bit better, completely on the back foot. But, I don't really have much complaints. I've seen Canelo fight on the back foot before. He's usually very, very decently well at that too. So it is what it is. I just saw that maybe in that Gennady Golovkin fight, maybe he could have performed a bit better. But I think that he's even better, progressed from that fight. So it is what it is. But Canelo Alvarez, mainly what his plan is now, is all in all, he usually likes to break his opponents down. He usually likes to put that pressure on him. But if the pressure overall does not work, he can fight on the back foot. He can fight in the mid-range. He can fight pretty much in whatever bubble that he needs to. And that's a big part of the reason what makes Canelo Alvarez such a special fighter.
Floyd Mayweather did. He took his soul. He snatched his heart and ripped it out of him. Floyd didn't just walk Canelo into some shit. Excuse my language. Floyd Mayweather also walked down Canelo. He didn't just outbox Canelo. He outfought Canelo. He hurt Canelo and got Canelo's respect. That's what Caleb Plant failed to do. However,
I would somewhat agree with that, but the problem is that Caleb Plant is not Floyd Mayweather Jr. Another problem is that Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez aren't either. Now, do I believe that Dmitry Bivol is? No, I don't. But I don't think that Canelo Alvarez is ever going to find another fighter again that is going to be like Floyd Mayweather Jr. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is one of those dudes to where it's almost like facing Michael Jordan. Or if you go to tennis, like a Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal or Novak Djokovic. Or if you go into football, a Tom Brady or someone like that. Facing Floyd Mayweather Jr., you're facing someone that's a once-in-a-lifetime generational talent. And I have certain people all in all, that go in my comment section and they disagree. But listen, at the end of the day, if you're a person that knows boxing, you know that Floyd is a person that is to be highly, respected. He's a person that is a very, very talented boxer, a person that is a boxing genius. And I think that Canelo is a boxing genius in his own right as well. But at the end of the day, not only was Canelo probably overall, I don't want to make an excuse here, but I mean, if we are going to be real, not only was Canelo overall probably a little bit too inexperienced overall to, really, I don't know if I really want to say that. Of course, he was a champion. What I will say is this, is that Floyd Mayweather Jr., not only was he so experienced at that point in time in his career, but he really was in a rhythm of things. And I don't think that Canelo, all in all, I don't think that he was really ready for the level overall that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was going to bring it into that fight. But it is what it is. Anyway.
Y'all know.
Now, is that me saying that this version of Canelo would have beat, that version of Floyd back then? Or whatever you think the best version of Floyd would have been? That's not 100% what I'm saying. But I'm saying that maybe Canelo would have been slightly more better equipped. But, it is what it is.
Caleb Plant is not 5% the fighter Floyd Mayweather is. Even then, Caleb Plant was outboxing.
Well, I'm not sure if I would say that Caleb Plant is now 5% because once upon a time, AKHi, and this has been on proven record, which pretty much ruins your credibility, that you thought that Caleb Plant once upon a time was a great threat towards Canelo. You even went as far to say that you thought Canelo was avoiding Caleb Plant because of his athletic and slick and good American style. And then ever since Canelo Alvarez went after him, all of a sudden he's this weak white boy. But it is what it is. Anyway.
Canelo early with ease, catching Canelo with the same punches Floyd Mayweather caught Canelo with 8 years ago, which further proves this is the exact same Canelo. The only difference, Canelo is now the pioneer of the...
No, I don't think that Canelo Alvarez is exactly the same, and I think that... but this is the point that they've not only tried to make with Canelo Alvarez, they tried to make it with, Vasily Lomachenko and Tyson Fury and a certain amount of other fighters as well. Basically any Caucasian or Latino fighter that they don't want within the high ranks. That's why they hate Tyson Fury. Whoever has more power, whoever is the bigger threat, people most of the time when it comes on it, people, like with Michael Conlan, for example, recently, so many people are actually giving him compliments, now because they're like, man, you put up a good fight, mate, when it comes down to it, I actually gain respect for you. You know why people, allegedly gain respect for you? Because, when you lose a fight or something like that, because you're no longer a threat. All of a sudden you're a loser. All of a sudden when it comes down to it, you have no more power. So people overall, they're not really going to be saying as many bad things about you anymore. Just like kind of like with Vasily Lomachenko. Don't get me wrong, they still don't respect Vasily Lomachenko that much. But when it comes down to it, they don't talk about him as much anymore because he's no longer a threat. Right now, Canelo Alvarez is threat number one. He's threat numero uno. So they got to talk about him.
NBF league in the sport of boxing. That no black fighters.
And they used to give a whole lot of respect also to another fighter by the name of Tyson Fury. But that was before they thought Tyson Fury actually was going to win overall not only just one fight over Deontay Wilder, but multiple. And now ever since Tyson Fury did that, they basically rake his name over the coals.
Because he hates American style. According to his own trainer, Eddie Reynoso, he stated, quote, "The African-American style is difficult." He also said that Charlo is a spectacular fighter, and Canelo agrees. Canelo said he's a great fighter, which is why Canelo vacated his WBC belt to Charlo by requesting the NBF Witness Protection franchise in order to avoid...
Well, if you truly believe all in all that Jermall Charlo truly is the chosen one, and if you believe that Jermall Charlo all in all is truly that dangerous of a fighter when it comes down to it, you overall will not be changing your energy when Canelo Alvarez debatably does possibly go on to face Jermall Charlo, and then every single time when that possibly happens, you say, here, Canelo Alvarez goes again facing opponents coming off their worst performances. So, let's just be real, AKHi. You just don't like any of the fights that Canelo was going to take.
Getting exposed by the American style once again. That's exactly why it's NBF for Canelo. He's only willing to race against Europeans. Then he claims he's the fastest man in the world, but he does not want to race the fastest fighters in the world, the fastest people in the world.
Right, but are there really any black fighters that are really looked at as top 10 pound for pound within his weight divisions? Like I said, don't get me wrong, and Jermall Charlo and Dmitry Bivol, very decent fighters. Are they a bigger threat than Dmitry Bivol? No. And obviously Dante's Boxing Nation and other channels, and AKHi TV pretty much is a Dante's Boxing Nation nut hugger. So when it comes down to the overall, basically meaning that whatever Dante says, he basically says as well. So when it comes down to it all in all, Dante even at one point in time said that he believes that the only two fighters in the world today that he believes would hands down beat Canelo would be either A, Dmitry Bivol or B, Dmitry Bivol. But then when possibly those fights may happen, as the Dmitry Bivol fight is happening now, all of a sudden their energy changes. Basically telling you what, they don't believe half the shit that they say.
The best fighters in the world, aka the Black American undefeated fighters, which all of this has been proven statistically. But getting back to the point,
Well, certain statistics overall are great, but at the end of the day, when we really take a look at Jermall Charlo, is he really a person that is greater than Dmitry Bivol? No. I mean, if we really also want to talk about statistics, let's take a look at the resume overall and probably the winning percentages overall at the opponents that Jermall Charlo has usually fought versus what Dmitry Bivol has fought.
Believes he will eventually...
Now, who knows? Maybe Jermall Charlo's record would still be better. I'm not sure. But what I will say is this. Does Jermall Charlo really have a name on his record that is that much greater overall than a Jean Pascal or overall the Sullivan Barrera or, that of, what the hell is his name? Joe Smith Jr., on Dmitry Bivol's resume? Now, if you want to argue that Julian J. Rock Williams was maybe a more talented opponent at the time, maybe you can argue that, but not by much. Julian J. Rock Williams has pretty much proved to us that he's pretty much a person that, although talented, he pretty much can't take a punch overall from a fly. It is what it is.
Catch up with Bivol. He loves that European style he thinks is flawed. However, if he doesn't catch up with Bivol to the body, or catch Bivol with the proper shot to the head, then this decision may slip Canelo's hand, even though we all know the judges are there to save the day for Canelo like Superman. Regardless of that, there's a good chance...
Well, overall, what Canelo Alvarez will have to do is that he'll have to be defensively responsible. He'll have to get in there, more than likely counter Dmitry Bivol to the body with that left hook, go up to the top with the right cross as well, utilize his jab early on, probably both to the body and to the head. Canelo has a very, very great jab when it comes down to it, so we'll see all in all what he can utilize here. And another big question is also going to be about Mr. Dmitry Bivol. What can he do?
Bivol will easily outbox Canelo, especially with his jab and the 1-2. Trust me, Bivol's jab will give Canelo a lot of problems. And with Bivol being so good at controlling...
I have no doubt about it. Dmitry Bivol is a person that can move around very, very well. The problem is overall about Dmitry Bivol, though, in this fight is he can't move around too much. Don't get me wrong, you can move around quite a bit in this fight, but sometimes you are going to have to pressure Canelo Alvarez. And if Dmitry Bivol looks very afraid of Canelo Alvarez's power very early on, and if he ends up backing up pretty much the whole entire time, he probably is not going to win this fight. He's going to have to try to back up Canelo Alvarez here and there, or at least be willing to strike with him. So we'll see what happens.
He may actually prevent Canelo from being able to access his body whenever he wants to, especially if Bivol is able to hurt Canelo with a counter or with a 1-2 and get his respect. Furthermore, to the Canelo fans in the comment section that's always asking, how can this be a cherry pick if it's a dangerous fight? Well,
this isn't even just a dangerous fight. This is a phenomenally dangerous fight. But anyway, I'm very concerned about that question as well.
The answer is simple. It's because Canelo is so flawed. On top of that, it's the exact same way Teofimo Lopez cherry-picked Kambosos to duck Devin Haney for undisputed and ended up losing to Kambosos in the process. The same.
Right, but are we really going to go down that road, AKHi? Are we really going to compare, the George Kambosos versus Teofimo Lopez fight to this one? Come on. Dmitry Bivol is a person that is naturally bigger. He's a person, all in all, that is naturally bigger than Canelo Alvarez. He's a person that, in my view, I would count as one of the top 20, at least top 30 pound-for-pound fighters within the world of boxing. He's been a legitimate, solid champion and looked at as one of the two best heavyweights within the past 5 years at least. Was George Kambosos anywhere near that level when he fought Teofimo Lopez, or was George Kambosos by the majority of people looked at pretty much at best as debatably a tough mandatory? Like, come on, man. Come on.
Thing could happen to Canelo. He ducked Charlo. For nearly a decade, he turned down $100 million plus to fight both Charlo and Benavidez in order to go the easy route. Fight Bivol for less money, and a fight where Canelo's own fans only voted 9% for Canelo to fight Bivol next. However, they overwhelmingly picked Charlo for Canelo to fight next. Remember, Canelo fangirls, this is your own pick. I did not pick this. I only made one of these polls. But you...
Actually, you don't know overall who picked that, but like I said, you can never trust any of these polls. How do you know overall that a bunch of Canelo Alvarez fans or a certain amount of people that like Canelo overall would want to see that? But even if you're talking about overall just taking about the fights, or taking the fights that people want to see. Now, I, for one, of course, would love to see the Jamal Charlo fight. You maybe even can debate that certain people overall would want to see the Jamal Charlo fight, of course, over that of the Bivol fight. Maybe I could even say that there was a part of me that wanted to see the Jamal Charlo fight more just because in terms of a monetary value, overall it's a bigger fight. But, pretty much, if I were to make a comparison to this would almost be like the Anthony Joshua Deontay Wilder fight when it comes down to it. Or, well, I don't know if I want to 100% compare it to that, but that's kind of the best comparison that I have. For those of you overall that ever watch UFC, for those of you that don't, I'll explain it overall in this way. When UFC overall was somewhat getting started up, or when it was just getting popular, I believe in the early 2000s, there was overall these two fighters within the light heavyweight division, and, for the UFC, the light heavyweight division is at the 205 weight limit, and there was these two fighters, one by the name of the Iceman Chuck Liddell, another one was the Huntington Beach bad boy, I believe, Mr. Tito Ortiz. Well, they always overall wanted to have a fight between those two, but for whatever reason, more than likely in my view, because Tito didn't want no part of Chuck, but it is what it is. But at the end of the day, the fight did not come to fruition when Tito Ortiz was the champion, and Chuck Liddell was looked at as the best challenger, because eventually, there came along a guy by the name of Randy Couture, and overall he ended up beating Tito Ortiz, I believe, in a 5-round match, and all in all, he ended up regaining the title. But then eventually the fight still ended up happening anyway. Now that fight overall ended up being the more popular option overall for Chuck Liddell, but the better fight overall for Chuck Liddell at the end of the day was Randy Couture. And the reason why that is because Randy Couture at the end of the day was a more skilled and better fighter than that of Tito Ortiz. So Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, they're always going to be the more popular options for Canelo Alvarez because they're American fighters. They're just those fights overall that people want to see. But for those of us, of course, that are boxing purists, and overall that knows, we know overall who Dmitry Bivol is. We know that Dmitry Bivol is a real deal fighter. And that Dmitry Bivol, I'm sorry, but in my view, he's just going to be a much bigger threat than what David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo ever would be and ever will be. I just think that Jamal Charlo, I think that he's too similar in size to Canelo Alvarez. And if you're a person that is similar in size to Canelo and you're that limited in terms of your skill set, I don't think you're going to do extraordinarily well. David Benavidez, of course, he's bigger than Canelo. You know, maybe you can even debate that he's a natural light heavyweight, but he don't really have the power of a natural light heavyweight. And on top of that, he don't even have the skill set of some of the other great heavyweights there, like a Dmitry Bivol or a Tabita Beef. So I don't think that he would do extremely well either. But that's not me saying that I would not want to see the fights. I'm just saying that I really can't get after Canelo for taking the Dmitry Bivol fight. But anyway.
You guys were the ones that picked Charlo over everybody else on the list. And to be fair, I have to give Canelo credit. I'm just glad he's not fighting a MacBook. Excuse me, a Macabu. See, Canelo didn't even want to...
Oh man, good one. This man's still boxing ego shit.
fight a Bivol. He wanted to fight Macabu. We know that because he requested to fight Macabu. But no one from DAZN, Showtime, or any network wanted to pick up such a cherry pick. That type of cherry would...
I think that the Macabu fight once again. And do I think that Macabu is an elite fighter? No, I do not. But at the end of the day, I do think the fight will be interesting. I think that more than likely Canelo will face Bivol next. More than likely he'll face Gennady Golovkin in the rematch. And I think that the perfect fight to cap off the end of the year would be that cruiserweight matchup with Macabu. I think all in all that it would be a great, great fight. You know, and the reason why I think that is because, once again, that basically would be Canelo Alvarez accomplishing history. Like I said, you know, and I've said this many times before, there's not many fighters all in all that, you know, were champions at the 154-pound division, then were champions all the way up to the cruiserweight division. Like I said, if there was, like I said, if Canelo Alvarez was looked at, you know, as a black fighter, if he was of the black demographic, these guys would be calling him one of the 20 greatest fighters of all time.
have crushed any network's ratings. So Canelo had to go with the next best option. He was forced to take the Bivol fight because that was the easiest option on the list, at least in Canelo's mind. That's what Canelo...
So basically that's the excuse they're going to make. Because some of these guys, they already said once upon a time that they thought Dmitry Bivol overall was was the harder fight. So basically what do they now have to say? Well, Canelo must think overall that they're the easiest option. So once again, like I said, they're never going to give him credit. But I never really expected that anyway. It is what it is. I just say, you know, I like to review these videos here and there over to expose certain narratives. But I just thought that would be interesting.
Believes, because if he believed anything else, he would have obviously chosen the Al Heyman deal to fight Charlo and Benavidez for way more money and shut down all the critics in the process.
Well, I'm not really sure overall if it's for way more money because I believe that Canelo Alvarez now for this next fight is getting $85 million. And basically that would mean more money. At least I believe, but I would have to see.
Because those are actually the biggest...
But I could be wrong. Someone let me know.
...money and legacy fights for the moment in time for Canelo Alvarez. Furthermore, I see Canelo Alvarez fans in my comment section saying things like, "You a Canelo hater. You said 3 years ago Caleb Plant is a really slick boxer that could beat Canelo."
Obviously, a certain amount of these people have seen the videos that I also have seen as well. You know, I love AKHi TV's, you know, Mexican accent there. That's got to be the worst Mexican accent that I personally ever heard in my life. At least Dante had some flair with it. Anyway, when it comes down to it all in all, obviously, you know, he has seen some of the videos that have resurfaced.
A year later, you changed your mind and you said Canelo will end Caleb Plant's career. Why did you change your mind a year or two before?
I don't know if he's trying to sound like someone who's Latino or someone who's mentally challenged. If he's trying to sound like someone in a sped class, he's got that shit. He's got that shit down.
Canelo for them. You a Canelo hater. Man, if you happen to be one of them decafs, please smack yourself for the culture. Smack yourself one time for sounding as dumb as you look. If I said something 3 years ago, that's outdated. You know what can happen in 3 years? They can possibly invent a car that can fly.
Right, that's understandable, AKHi, but the big question overall is this. If you're really overall going to state that, then why is there no consistency? Because basically when it comes to Caleb Plant, you basically said overall 3 years ago that, well, once upon a time, Caleb Plant was a slick fighter, and that's why Canelo Alvarez won't fight him. It's understandable that, we all change our opinions and certain things can change within 3 years. But what really changed with Caleb Plant? There was nothing that really changed about him. Then all of a sudden you basically were saying is that, oh, he had no power, he has no athleticism, he has no this. All of a sudden all that changed. What, did Caleb Plant just lose all his boxing ability and athleticism within the next 3 years? Like, come on. He suffered no losses. Overall, he was putting on decent performances. So what really changed about him? So it's no offense on AKHi TV, but you're full of shit. And you got caught for it. Now, if there was someone overall like that of a Kell Brook or an Amir Khan, and at one point in time, a certain amount of people maybe thought that that was a decent fight, but then they weren't necessarily the same, and then maybe they fought a certain opponent, then, kind of like the Kell Brook Amir Khan fight, then we can say that, yeah, Kell Brook beat Amir Khan, but it wasn't really at the best point in his career. Or maybe, a better example, maybe when Terrence Crawford beat him. So that's a little bit of a different situation. But the problem is that nothing really changed with Caleb Plant. He was the same fighter that he was, 3 years earlier. So why did you change your energy?
Alone me changing my opinion on a potential fight. It's no different than thinking.
And why overall did you not bring that up until Canelo Alvarez possibly could have fought him?
Edgar Berlanga.
And also another thing overall that you got caught about saying, AKHi, is that you predicted it 2 years ago. So basically you got caught in your own bullshit.
It was a monster 2 years ago. Then a year later we all saw Lubin drop him in sparring. Now all of a sudden, he's no longer the monster, even though he's still a prospect.
Right, but the problem is that Caleb Plant, when it comes down to it, Caleb Plant was the same fighter that he was he was the same fighter when he fought Canelo Alvarez that he was 3 years ago. So why all of a sudden did your energy change when Canelo Alvarez all of a sudden got the fight set up?
Which the same thing happened to Caleb Plant. He was an unknown fighter till we all saw the leaked sparring footage of him getting exposed in sparring, just like Edgar Berlanga. And that's my point exactly. Who cares what I said 3 years ago? Something that's outdated before any of us knew anything about Caleb Plant.
Hold on. I want to overall see the sparring video, who he was talking about.
The same thing happened to Caleb Plant. He was Lubin dropped him in sparring. Now all of a sudden, he's no longer the monster, even though he's still a prospect. Which the same thing happened to Caleb Plant. He was an unknown fighter till we all saw the leaked sparring footage of him getting exposed in sparring, just like Edgar Berlanga. And that's my point exactly.
Dude, come on. He's not even fighting back in that sparring video. You can't rely overall what happens in sparring. You have to rely on what happens in bouts. You have to rely overall what happens in professional bouts. Come on. Now, if it's someone overall like a Mike Tyson where you can clearly tell that he's starting to go downhill and you can see all in all that all his sparring videos that he just don't look the same and all this other stuff. But come on, did Caleb Plant really look that different? Come on. Caleb Plant obviously put up a very good effort because you alleged that Caleb Plant basically was outboxing the whole entire time. But that's right. Never mind. He thinks that Canelo Alvarez, is the most flawed fighter on earth. So, or not the most flawed fighter on earth, but he thinks overall that he's much more flawed. But anyway.
Who cares what I said 3 years ago? Something that's outdated before any of us knew anything about Caleb Plant. What matters is what I said for a whole year leading up to the Canelo Alvarez undisputed fight. Like Roger Mayweather said, you decavs don't know shit about boxing.
Actually, AKHi, you don't know shit about boxing. You've never known shit about boxing. You still don't know shit about boxing. That's why a lot of your predictions are wrong. That's why a lot of the stupid shit you say really don't make any sense. And that's why you got caught with your own bullshit. But it is what it is.
One fight can change your opinion on a fighter. This is boxing where a punch could change a fighter's career. So yeah, I did say
Right, but your opinion on Caleb Plant never really changed until Canelo Alvarez announced that he was going to fight him. Let's be real. It's very interesting because, like I said, whoever Canelo Alvarez faces next, all of a sudden he's facing them off their weakest performance. But if Jamal Charlo, if he was going to face Caleb Plant before Canelo Alvarez got to him, you know what they would have said? Oh, that's a huge fight. Shit, Dante even exposed himself when it came down to, when Caleb Plant was about to fight Jamal Charlo after that ass whooping he took from Canelo. And he said that was a great fight. So come on, let's keep it real.
Caleb Plant was a slick boxer, and he will give Canelo trouble because of his style. Of course he would. Even Amir Khan gave Canelo trouble, which I was absolutely right in my prediction, because Caleb Plant outboxed Canelo early with ease, then got knocked.
No, he didn't outbox Canelo early with ease. I think that maybe he captured a few rounds, and then Canelo Alvarez pretty much broke him down.
Knocked out later, just like I predicted. Now, what I didn't know 3 years ago that I found out a year later is that Caleb Plant breaks under pressure. I mean, like most people, I didn't really watch Caleb Plant like that. Until 2 years ago, sparring footage got leaked of Caleb Plant getting beat up in sparring. Absolutely getting smashed. Getting exposed in sparring. So I looked into it. Went back and watched Caleb Plant versus Uzateki and seen them same flaws of Caleb Plant breaking down under pressure. Then seeing Caleb Plant duck the heck out of Benavidez, who is a pressure machine. That's when I automatically knew that Canelo Alvarez was going to be gunning for Caleb Plant. Because if I seen the sparring footage, I figured Canelo has seen.
Well, the big question is, Mr. AKHi, is that are you going to say the same thing with Jamal Charlo? The problem overall doesn't seem to be overall you realizing a fighter's faults. The problem is, all in all, because every fighter is going to have faults. David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo certainly have faults. The problem seems to be is that whoever Canelo Alvarez faces, you always seem to find a way around overall to either criticize Canelo or overall not to give him credit. And this all overall basically comes down to you don't want him as a #1 pound-for-pound fighter. But it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. I'm going to let it maybe play on for a few more minutes, and then we're going to end it because I really don't want it to be much longer. I didn't expect it to be this long, but we'll see what happens.
The footage, or at the very least, heard about them, which probably was the case because some of Caleb Plant's sparring partners actually were Canelo Alvarez sparring partners. Therefore, the word got around. Next thing you know, Canelo Alvarez is begging to get the Caleb Plant fight. And I'm talking about before Canelo even got any of the belts at 168 pounds. That's why the memes you guys see, I always had Caleb Plant part of the destination Canelo is heading toward. Keep in mind, these memes were made 2 years ago. So who cares about you Canelo fangirls being obsessed with something I said 3 years ago? Something that...
Obsessed with something I said. AKHi, no one is obsessed overall with what you're saying. The thing is overall is, do you keep the same energy? And, the answer is no.
It's outdated.
And even if you're talking about, just within a couple of weeks, no, these channels, like I said, they're very hard to rely on because, at least I don't rely on them because they don't keep the same energy. But anyways, that's pretty much going to be about it for the video. But anyways, that's pretty much about it. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video, and we'll see overall where this fight goes. But I think that it's a phenomenal fight. It's going to be a very interesting fight because we're going to see what Canelo Alvarez is made out of in this fight and what also Mr. Dmitry Bivol is made out of in this fight. It's going to be a very spectacular fight, and I cannot wait for it. I do believe all in all that it is going to be on pay-per-view, but I think that's going to be worth it. I think all in all that it is a fantastic matchup. But we'll see all in all what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.